The emergency transmission crackled through the deep space monitoring station orbiting Titan. Commander Sarah Chen leaned forward in her chair, her coffee growing cold as she listened to the desperate alien voices speaking in broken Standard Galactic. "Please, anyone who receives this message. We are the Zephyrian Republic. Our worlds burn. The void swarm comes." The transmission cut to static, then resumed with what sounded like explosions in the background. "They have consumed 17 systems. Billions dead. Our fleets are broken. If any civilization can hear this, we beg for aid. Coordinates follow." Sarah's hands moved quickly across her console, recording the message and running it through the universal translator. The Zephyrians were a bird-like species known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and advanced agricultural techniques. They supplied food to dozens of worlds and had never been involved in any conflict. The Void Swarm, however, was a name that made even hardened space marines nervous. They were an ancient enemy that appeared every few thousand years, consuming everything in their path. Living ships the size of small moons, controlled by a hive mind that knew only hunger. Within hours, the message had reached Earth's high command. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stood before the massive holographic display showing the galaxy's spiral arms. Red markers indicated confirmed void swarm positions, while yellow showed systems that had gone dark. "The situation is worse than we thought," Dr. Elena Vasquez, the chief xenobiologist, reported. "According to our intelligence network, the swarm has consumed over 30 systems in just 2 months. That's faster than any previous incursion." Admiral Rodriguez studied the tactical display. The Zephyrian Republic controlled a cluster of 12 systems in the Outer Rim, known for their beautiful garden worlds and peaceful inhabitants. Now half of those worlds showed red markers. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Williams spoke up from the communications station. "We're receiving similar distress calls from the Crystalline Hegemony, the Aquatic Collective, and the Nomad fleets. The entire Outer Rim is requesting aid." The Admiral's jaw tightened. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years, ever since they'd developed faster-than-light travel. Most older species still considered them newcomers, barely evolved beyond their primitive homeworld. "What's our fleet status?" he asked. "The 5th, 7th, and 9th fleets are currently on patrol duty. The 3rd and 4th are in dock for maintenance. Total active ships, 437 vessels," reported the fleet coordinator. Dr. Vasquez shook her head. "Admiral, with respect, the Vorthak Empire sent 2,000 ships against the swarm 3 weeks ago. Only 12 vessels returned. The Crystalline Hegemony lost their entire grand fleet. What can our few hundred ships do that their thousands couldn't?" Admiral Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, then activated the communications array. "Get me a direct line to the President. Emergency priority." 30 minutes later, President Sarah Manning appeared on the main screen from the Oval Office. Her expression was grave as the Admiral briefed her on the situation. "Madam President, the Outer Rim is falling. Conservative estimates put the refugee population at over 2 billion beings. They're fleeing toward the inner systems, but the swarm is moving faster than their evacuation ships." "What are the other major powers doing?" the President asked. "The Altarian Federation has closed their borders. The Silicon Confederacy is fortifying their core worlds. The Council of Elders is debating whether to attempt negotiation with the swarm." President Manning's expression hardened. "Negotiation? With a hive mind that's been consuming civilizations for millions of years?" "That's the Council's position, yes, ma'am. They believe there might be a diplomatic solution." The President was quiet for several heartbeats. Through the screen, Admiral Rodriguez could see her looking out the window at the sprawling cityscape of New Washington. "Admiral, 60 years ago, my grandfather fought in the resource wars. Earth was dying, our people were starving, and the powerful nations just watched while the weak suffered. He used to tell me that the measure of a civilization isn't how it treats those who can benefit it, but how it treats those who can't. She turned back to face the camera. The Zephyrians can't offer us anything. Their worlds are agricultural. Their technology is focused on peaceful purposes. Helping them gains us nothing strategically. Admiral Rodriguez nodded. That's correct, Madam President. Then it's the right thing to do. Her voice carried the weight of absolute decision. Admiral, I'm authorizing the deployment of the entire Sol Defense Force. Every ship, every Marine, every piece of military hardware we have. The Admiral's eyes widened. Madam President, that would leave Earth defenseless. No, Admiral. That would leave Earth defended by the knowledge that we stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Begin immediate mobilization. I want every available vessel en route to Zephyrian space within 72 hours. As the transmission ended, Admiral Rodriguez turned to his staff. The command center had gone completely silent, everyone having heard the President's orders. You heard the Commander-in-Chief, he said, his voice carrying across the room. General Quarters, begin mobilization of all fleets. Dr. Vasquez, I want everything we have on void swarm tactics and biology. Williams, send a message to Zephyrian space. Tell them help is coming. Sir, Dr. Vasquez said quietly, the other species, they have technologies we don't. Weapons we can't match. If they couldn't stop the swarm... Admiral Rodriguez looked at the tactical display again, watching the red markers spread like a disease across the outer rim. Doctor, there's something the other species don't have. What's that, sir? They've never fought an enemy that threatened their entire species' existence. Humans have. We've been fighting extinction since we climbed down from the trees. And we're still here. Across the Sol system, humanity's war machine began to wake. Shipyards that had been building peaceful exploration vessels switched to military production. The massive orbital stations around Mars began loading ammunition and supplies onto transport ships. The lunar academies graduated their cadets early, sending fresh officers to report to their vessels. In the asteroid belt, mining ships were converted to military transports. The research stations at Jupiter's moons contributed their breakthrough technologies. Even the colony ships being prepared for distant worlds were retrofitted with weapons and shield generators. On Earth itself, families gathered around their communication screens as news of the deployment spread. In the military districts, children watched as their parents shipped out, many understanding that they might never see them again. But something else was happening across human space. Volunteers were coming forward in unprecedented numbers. Civilian pilots offering their ships as scouts and couriers. Engineers requesting transfers to the war effort. Even elderly veterans from the resource wars were asking to serve in whatever capacity they could. The message was spreading through human space faster than any official communication. Somewhere in the galaxy, peaceful people were dying, and they had asked for help. Humanity was going to answer. As the great fleets began forming up in the space around Earth, Admiral Rodriguez received a personal message on his private channel. It was from General Patricia Hayes, commander of the Sol Marine Corps. Admiral, her gruff voice came through clearly, I've got every jarhead in the Corps volunteering for this mission. We're loading every dropship, every assault craft, every piece of equipment we've got. The Corps is ready to show these void things what humans do to bullies. Similar reports came in from across the military branches. The Space Navy was pushing their ships beyond normal safety parameters to reach maximum deployment speed. The Logistics Corps was working around the clock to supply the massive fleet. The Intelligence Division was analyzing every scrap of information about the Void Swarm. As Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the flagship UES Defiant, watching the largest human fleet in history assemble, he felt a mixture of pride and terror. They were about to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations spanning thousands of worlds. But as he looked at the determination on his crew's faces, as he received reports of the fleet's readiness, As he thought about the desperate alien voices pleading for help, he knew they were doing the right thing. "Communications," he called out. "Open a channel to all ships." "Channel open, sir." Admiral Rodriguez activated the fleet-wide communication system. Across hundreds of vessels, human men and women turned to listen to their commander. "People of the Sol Defense Force," he began, "we are about to embark on a mission unlike any in human history. We're not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. We're fighting because people who never did us any harm are dying, and they asked for our help." He paused, looking out at the assembled fleet. "The enemy we face has destroyed civilizations that are older and more advanced than ours. They have weapons we don't understand and numbers we can't match. But they've made one critical error." The Admiral's voice carried conviction that reached every human ear in the fleet. "They think that because we're young, we're weak. They think that because we're small, we don't matter. They're about to learn what every bully in human history has learned. When you threaten innocent people, when you think might makes right, when you believe the strong can prey on the weak without consequence." Admiral Rodriguez smiled, and across the fleet, his smile was reflected on thousands of faces. You eventually run into someone stronger. The journey to Zephyrian space took 18 days at maximum hyperspace velocity. During that time, the human fleet moved like a metal storm through the galaxy, their engines burning bright trails across the cosmic darkness. Aboard the UES Defiant, Admiral Rodriguez received hourly updates on the deteriorating situation. The Zephyrian capital world of Arelon had fallen 3 days after their distress call. The beautiful sky cities that had taken centuries to build were now nothing but ash and twisted metal. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Williams reported, "we're receiving a transmission from a Zephyrian refugee convoy. They're requesting permission to speak with you directly." "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing a bird-like alien with iridescent feathers and large, intelligent eyes. But those eyes held a depth of sorrow that transcended species. "Admiral Rodriguez of the human fleet," the alien spoke in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "I am Wing Commander Silas of the Zephyrian Republic. I must tell you to turn back." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Wing Commander, we received your distress call. We're here to help." "No, you don't understand." Silas's feathers rustled with agitation. "The swarm is not like the pirates or raiders your species might have faced. They are the end of everything. The Vorthak Empire had ships the size of your cities. The crystalline hegemony had weapons that could shatter planets. All of them are gone." The Admiral watched as tears formed in the alien's large eyes. "Honored Admiral, your species is young. You have perhaps 200 worlds. You should take your people and flee to the galactic rim. Live. Don't throw your lives away for us. We are already dead." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, then activated his personal communicator. "Dr. Vasquez, please join me on the bridge." When the xenobiologist arrived, Rodriguez gestured to the screen. "Doctor, what can you tell me about Zephyrian psychology?" Dr. Vasquez studied the alien on the screen. "They're naturally pessimistic when faced with overwhelming odds. It's an evolutionary survival trait. When their ancestors faced predators they couldn't fight. They fled to survive." "Wing Commander Silas," Rodriguez addressed the alien directly, "has your species ever seen humans fight?" "No, Admiral. Your people are known as explorers and traders. Very peaceful." Rodriguez smiled, and something in that expression made the alien lean back slightly. "Wing Commander, humans are peaceful when we choose to be. But when someone threatens innocent people, when bullies think they can take what they want, when predators hunt the helpless..." The Admiral's voice grew harder. "We become something else entirely." On the tactical display behind him, Wing Commander Silas could see the scope of the human fleet. 450 ships of various sizes, moving in perfect formation toward Zephyrian space. "Your ships," Silas said hesitantly. "They are much smaller than what the other species brought against the swarm." "Size isn't everything, Wing Commander. What matters is how you use what you have." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. "Wing Commander, may I ask you something? When the swarm attacked your worlds, how did your people respond?" We tried to evacuate the civilians. Our military formed defensive lines to buy time for the escape ships. And the other species, how did they fight?" Silas's feathers drooped. "They brought their grand fleets, massive formations of their most powerful ships. They tried to meet the swarm head-on, matching power with power." Dr. Vasquez nodded. "That's what we thought. Admiral, I believe we may have an advantage the other species didn't. Which is, humans don't fight fair." The transmission with Wing Commander Silas ended with a promise that human evacuation ships would assist with refugee operations. But as the fleet approached the edge of Zephyrian space, it was clear that evacuation might not be necessary. The Void Swarm had stopped their advance. "Admiral," reported the sensor officer, "long-range scans are picking up massive energy signatures. The swarm fleet appears to be waiting." "Waiting for what?" "Unknown, sir. But they're holding position in the Arelon system, approximately 50,000 kilometers from the planet's orbit." Captain Maria Santos, Rodriguez's second-in-command, studied the tactical display. "Sir, that's unusual behavior. According to all reports, the swarm never stops. They consume everything and move on immediately." Admiral Rodriguez activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez. We're approaching the combat zone. Remember, we're not here to match the swarm's power. We're here to do what humans do best. We're here to win." The first contact came when the human fleet was still 12 hours away from the Arelon system. A single Void Swarm scout ship, roughly the size of a human cruiser but clearly organic in nature, dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of the human formation. "All ships, red alert," Rodriguez commanded. "Hold formation. Let's see what it wants." The organic ship hung motionless in space for several minutes, clearly scanning the human fleet. Then it transmitted a signal that the communication computers had never encountered before. "Admiral," the communication officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission, but it's not in any known language. It's mathematical, pure mathematical concepts." Dr. Vasquez moved to the communication station. "Can you put it through the universal translator?" "I can try, but this is unlike anything we've seen." "Wait. I'm getting something. It's very basic, but the computer is making some connections." A synthesized voice spoke through the bridge speakers. "Small meat creatures, why do you come to feeding grounds? You are not scheduled for consumption." The bridge fell silent. Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the human fleet. We're here to protect the Zephyrians." There was a long pause, then the voice returned. "Zephyrian biomass has been claimed. You are small, insignificant. Your biomass will be processed after current feeding cycle. Return to your small ships and wait." "I don't think so," Rodriguez replied calmly. Another pause, longer this time. "You challenge the swarm? Your ships are few. Your weapons are primitive. You will be consumed." "Maybe, but you'll have to work for it." The scout ship suddenly accelerated toward the human formation at incredible speed. But instead of trying to match its power, the human ships did something completely unexpected. They scattered. Not in panic or retreat, but in a carefully coordinated pattern that had been practiced thousands of times in Earth's asteroid belt. Suddenly, instead of facing a formation of ships, the swarm scout found itself surrounded by individual vessels attacking from every direction. The scout ship was fast and powerful, but it had been designed to fight large formations of ships standing their ground. It couldn't track and engage dozens of smaller vessels attacking from different angles simultaneously. Within minutes, the scout ship was disabled. Its organic hull breached in dozens of places. "All ships, cease fire," Rodriguez commanded. "Boarding parties, prepare for specimen collection." Captain Santos looked at him in surprise. "Sir, we're going to board that thing?" "Dr. Vasquez needs samples, and I want to know how these things think." The boarding operation was humanity's first direct contact with the void swarm. The interior of the scout ship was a nightmare of organic walls and pulsing biomechanical components, but the human Marines, trained in zero-gravity combat and urban warfare, moved through the alien vessel with deadly efficiency. They found the ship's control center where a creature that was part insect, part machine pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. It was still alive, connected to the ship through dozens of neural cables. "My God," Dr. Vasquez whispered as she studied the creature through her scanner. "It's not just controlling the ship. It is the ship. The entire vessel is grown around this central nervous system." The creature's multifaceted eyes focused on her. When it spoke, the words came from speakers grown into the organic walls. "You cannot comprehend the swarm. We are eternal. We have consumed galaxies." Dr. Vasquez knelt down beside the creature, her scanner revealing the complex neural network that extended throughout the ship. "You're a hive mind," she said. "Individual thoughts subordinated to collective will. But you've never encountered anything like us, have you?" The creature's bioluminescent patterns flickered rapidly. "You are like the others, hierarchical, organized, predictable." "No," Dr. Vasquez smiled. "We're really not." Back on the Defiant, the information gathered from the scout ship changed everything. Admiral Rodriguez stood before a holographic display showing the structure of swarm ships and the organization of their fleets. "They operate on pure hierarchy," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Every ship is controlled by a central mind, and all the central minds report to a cluster mind, which reports to a sector mind, and so on up to a galaxy mind." "Sounds familiar," Captain Santos observed. "Like a military command structure." "Exactly. But it's more rigid than any military we've ever seen. They can't improvise. They can't adapt quickly to unexpected tactics. Everything has to be processed up and down the hierarchy." Admiral Rodriguez studied the data. "So if we can disrupt their command structure, we can cause chaos in their entire fleet." "But Admiral, there's something else. The scout ship's database had information about the main swarm fleet. They have over 2,000 vessels in the Arelon system." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Then we better make sure we're not where they expect us to be." As the human fleet approached the Arelon system, Admiral Rodriguez implemented a battle plan unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of forming up for a massive fleet engagement, the human ships split into small groups and approached from dozens of different vectors. Some ships hid in asteroid fields. Others used the gravity wells of planets to mask their approach. A few bold captains actually landed their vessels on the surfaces of moons, shutting down all systems to avoid detection. The Void Swarm fleet hung in perfect formation around the devastated planet of Arelon, their massive organic ships pulsing with malevolent life. They were arranged in a classic defensive sphere designed to repel any conventional attack. They never saw the humans coming. The first strike came from inside the Arelon system itself, where 3 human destroyers had hidden in the planet's shadow. They emerged at full acceleration, targeting not the swarm ships, but the command vessels that Dr. Vasquez had identified as cluster mines. Simultaneously, human ships struck from every direction. Instead of trying to match the swarm's firepower, they used speed and unpredictability. They struck fast, hit specific targets, and disappeared before the swarm could respond. The effect was immediate and devastating. Cut off from their command structure, entire sections of the swarm fleet began operating independently, often getting in each other's way. Some ships even began attacking other swarm vessels, unable to distinguish friend from foe without central coordination. But the humans weren't finished. Phase 2 of Admiral Rodriguez's plan was even more audacious. "All ships," he transmitted across the fleet, "commence Operation David." Across the battlefield, human ships began deliberately ramming swarm vessels. But these weren't suicide runs. Each human ship had been equipped with a new weapon developed during the journey to Zephyrian space. Using technology adapted from asteroid mining equipment, the ships carried massive bore charges designed to punch through organic hulls and detonate inside swarm vessels. Ship after ship, human crews piloted their vessels into the heart of swarm formations, delivered their devastating cargo, and escaped in the confusion that followed. Some ships were lost, their crews becoming heroes whose names would be remembered for generations. But for every human ship destroyed, dozens of swarm vessels were eliminated. As the battle raged, Wing Commander Silas watched from his refugee convoy at the edge of the system. His large eyes reflected the flashing lights of distant explosions as the impossible happened before him. The humans were winning. "How?" he whispered to himself. "How are they doing this?" On the bridge of the Defiant, Admiral Rodriguez was asking himself the same question about the Void Swarm. Despite losing hundreds of ships, the swarm was beginning to adapt. New command structures were emerging. The remaining cluster minds were establishing backup hierarchies. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, "swarm vessels are beginning to coordinate again. They're learning from our attacks." Rodriguez nodded. He had expected this. The Void Swarm hadn't conquered galaxies by being unable to adapt. "Then it's time for Phase 3. Communications, signal all ships. Commence Operation Lazarus." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for centuries. Every destroyed human ship suddenly came back online. The crews that had appeared to die in ramming attacks had actually used the confusion to board swarm vessels. The ships that had seemed to be crippled were actually lying dormant, waiting for this moment. From inside the swarm fleet itself, human marines began seizing control of swarm vessels. Using the neural interface technology Dr. Vasquez had discovered, human technicians began turning the swarm's own ships against them. The sight of swarm vessels firing on their own fleet caused something that had never been recorded in Void Swarm history: panic. The hive mind, faced with a situation it couldn't understand or predict, made a decision that shocked everyone in the system. The Void Swarm retreated. As the massive organic ships disappeared into hyperspace, abandoning the Aerolon system, Wing Commander Silas could barely believe what he had witnessed. A human fleet, 1/5 the size of what the great galactic powers had sent against the swarm, had just achieved what no one thought possible. They had made the Void Swarm run away. The aftermath of the Battle of Aerolon sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm had retreated from a system they had claimed. News of humanity's victory spread faster than light itself, carried by refugee ships and emergency broadcasts to every corner of civilized space. On the bridge of the UES Defiant, Admiral Rodriguez stood before a holographic display showing the current position of swarm forces. The red markers that had been advancing steadily through the outer rim had stopped moving. Some were even pulling back. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice filled with amazement, "we're receiving data from our intelligence network. Swarm fleets across 17 sectors have ceased their advance. They're consolidating into defensive positions." Captain Santos looked up from her tactical station. "Sir, we're being hailed by the Galactic Council. Priority Alpha transmission. Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the council chamber with representatives from dozens of species. At the center sat Chancellor Vextar of the Altarian Federation, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights. "Admiral Rodriguez, The Chancellor's voice carried a tone of barely concealed disbelief. "The Council has received reports of your engagement with the Void Swarm. These reports seem highly improbable." "Which part, Chancellor?" "The part where a minor species with primitive technology somehow succeeded where civilizations with thousands of years of military experience failed catastrophically." Admiral Rodriguez exchanged glances with his senior staff. The arrogance in the Chancellor's voice was unmistakable, despite humanity having just saved the Outer Rim from complete annihilation. "Chancellor, I'm sending you our tactical data now. You can review our methods and draw your own conclusions." There was a pause as the Council members studied the transmitted information. Rodriguez could see several alien faces registering shock, confusion, and in some cases, what looked like fear. "This is irregular," Chancellor Vexitar finally said. "Your tactics show complete disregard for accepted military doctrine, ramming attacks, boarding actions against vastly superior forces. These are the methods of primitives." "They are the methods of humans," Rodriguez replied calmly. "And they work." Counselor Jexani of the Silicon Confederacy leaned forward. "Admiral, your actions have had unintended consequences. The Void Swarm's retreat has created a power vacuum in the Outer Rim. Various factions are already moving to claim abandoned territories. And several Council member species are expressing concern about humanity's sudden military capabilities," added Counselor Morden of the Aquatic Collective. Admiral Rodriguez felt a cold anger building in his chest. "Let me understand this correctly. We risked everything to save civilizations that were being slaughtered. We succeeded where you all failed. And now you're concerned that we might be too dangerous?" "The balance of power in this galaxy has been carefully maintained for millennia," Chancellor Vextar said. "Sudden changes can lead to instability." "The only instability I see," Rodriguez replied, his voice hardening, "is the fact that when innocent people were dying, the so-called great powers closed their borders and hid behind their defenses, while a minor species with primitive technology did what needed to be done." The transmission ended abruptly as the Council cut the connection. Captain Santos turned to the Admiral. "Sir, I'm detecting multiple fleet movements throughout the galaxy. It looks like several major powers are repositioning their forces." "Moving them where?" "Toward human space." Admiral Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then he activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez. Set course for Earth. Best possible speed." But the journey home revealed that humanity's victory had consequences beyond politics. As the fleet passed through civilized space, they were met by something unprecedented: convoys of alien ships waiting to thank them. The first was a small flotilla of Zephyrian vessels led by Wing Commander Silas. The bird-like alien's message was simple but profound. "Admiral Rodriguez, on behalf of the Zephyrian Republic, we offer you our eternal gratitude. Our children will learn your names. Our poets will sing of your courage. You saved not just our lives, but our future." Similar encounters happened throughout the journey. Refugee ships from a dozen different species altered course just to transmit messages of thanks. Mining vessels from the Outer Rim sent precious metals and rare elements as gifts. Even species that had never communicated with humans before reached out to express their admiration. But it was the message from the nomad fleets that truly showed how much the galaxy had changed. Fleet Master Craven, leader of the largest nomadic civilization in the galaxy, appeared on screen with what looked like excitement in his reptilian features. "Admiral Rodriguez of the humans," he said in his gravelly voice. "The nomad fleets have traveled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. We have seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth and death of species, observed the eternal cycle of war and peace." He paused, and something like respect entered his ancient eyes. "Never have we seen anything like what your people accomplished at Erelon. You have reminded the galaxy that courage and ingenuity can triumph over size and arrogance. The nomad fleets salute you." Then he said something that sent chills through every human who heard it. "We formally request permission to follow your fleet to human space. We wish to learn your ways of war." Admiral Rodriguez realized that humanity had just gained its first alien military allies. The return to Earth was unlike anything in human history. The Sol system was filled with ships from dozens of species, all waiting to witness humanity's homecoming. The human fleet that had left as unproven newcomers returned as the saviors of the Outer Rim, but the welcome wasn't universal. Long-range sensors detected several large fleets holding position just outside Sol's heliopause. The markings identified them as belonging to the Altarian Federation, the Silicon Confederacy, and the hegemony of Crystal Worlds. President Manning met Admiral Rodriguez on the orbital station above Earth, in a briefing room overlooking the blue and white marble of humanity's homeworld. "Admiral," she said without preamble, "the situation has become complicated." "How so, Madam President?" "3 of the major galactic powers have issued what they call security concerns about human military capabilities. They're demanding that we submit to weapons inspections and fleet limitations." Admiral Rodriguez felt that cold anger returning. "We saved the galaxy and they want to disarm us?" "It gets worse. The Galactic Council has called for an emergency session to discuss the human problem. They want to classify us as a potential threat species." "And if we refuse?" President Manning's expression was grim. "Economic sanctions, trade embargoes, possibly military action." Admiral Rodriguez looked out at Earth, thinking of all the humans down there who had sent their sons and daughters to fight for people they'd never met, for reasons that had nothing to do with politics or profit. "Madam President, what are our options? Officially, comply with their demands and hope they let us keep some semblance of independence. Unofficially?" She smiled, and Admiral Rodriguez was reminded why he followed her orders. "We show them exactly what they should be afraid of." The emergency session of the Galactic Council was held on the neutral world of Concordia, a beautiful planet that had been specifically designed for diplomatic gatherings. The great amphitheater where the council met could hold representatives from over 200 species. When Admiral Rodriguez entered the chamber as humanity's representative, the reaction was immediate. Some species applauded. Others fell silent. A few actually stood and bowed, showing respect for the admiral who had saved their worlds. But the council leadership was not impressed. "Admiral Rodriguez," Chancellor Vextar began, "this council has reviewed your species' recent military actions. While we acknowledge that your intentions may have been noble, your methods raise serious concerns about humanity's place in galactic civilization." "What concerns, Chancellor?" "Your tactics were unnecessarily aggressive. Your weapons violated several treaties regarding permissible military technology. Your fleet movements were not coordinated with proper galactic authority." Admiral Rodriguez looked around the chamber, noting which species were nodding in agreement and which looked uncomfortable with the Chancellor's words. "Let me understand, Chancellor. We're being criticized for fighting too effectively?" "You're being criticized for fighting outside accepted parameters," Counselor Jexani interjected. "Your ramming attacks, your boarding actions, your use of improvised weapons. These are not the methods of civilized warfare." "Civilized warfare?" Admiral Rodriguez's voice carried disbelief. "The Void Swarm was committing genocide on an unprecedented scale. Billions were dying. What part of that situation called for civilized methods?" "The proper response," Chancellor Vextar said coldly, "would have been to coordinate with Council forces and follow established military doctrine." "Council forces that were nowhere to be found," Rodriguez shot back. "Military doctrine that had already failed repeatedly." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several species representatives were nodding in agreement with the Admiral. The fact remains, Counselor Mordoon spoke up, that humanity now possesses military capabilities that could threaten galactic stability. This council must take appropriate measures, such as immediate limitation of human fleet size to no more than 50 vessels, submission to regular weapons inspections by Council authority, acceptance of Council oversight for all future human military operations. The chamber fell silent. Admiral Rodriguez looked around at the faces of beings representing hundreds of worlds and trillions of lives. Some looked ashamed. Others appeared afraid. A few showed anger, but not at humanity. "I see," Admiral Rodriguez said quietly. Then his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "Let me tell you what I think of your proposal." He activated his personal communicator, and suddenly, the chamber's main display showed the Sol system. But it wasn't just Earth and its colonies that appeared on screen. Over 2,000 ships filled the display. Human vessels, yes, but also ships from dozens of other species, the nomad fleets, Zephyrian agricultural ships converted to transports, mining vessels from the Outer Rim loaded with weapons and volunteers. "While you've been debating how to punish us for saving the galaxy," Admiral Rodriguez announced, "nearly 30 species have requested formal military alliances with humanity. The nomad fleets have sworn blood oaths to fight alongside us. The survivors of the Outer Rim have pledged their lives to our cause." Chancellor Vextar's crystalline features showed shock. This is unprecedented." "This is what happens when you stand for something," Admiral Rodriguez replied. "When you put lives before politics. When you choose to fight instead of hide." He turned to address the entire chamber. "The Council wants to limit human military power because you're afraid of what we might do with it. But you're asking the wrong question. You should be asking what we've already done. We've shown that the supposedly invincible can be defeated. We've proven that courage matters more than technology. We've reminded the galaxy that some things are worth fighting for." Admiral Rodriguez paused, letting his words sink in. "You want to treat us as a threat? Fine. But remember this. When the next crisis comes, when the next impossible enemy appears, when the next group of innocents cries out for help," he smiled, and every being in the chamber understood the message. "You'll know exactly who to call." The vote was closer than expected. But humanity retained its independence. Several major powers voted for restrictions, but the Outer Rim species, the minor powers, and even some traditional Council allies sided with humanity. As Admiral Rodriguez prepared to leave Concordia, he was approached by an unexpected visitor. Chancellor Vextar himself walked across the diplomatic compound, his crystalline form reflecting the setting sun. "Admiral," the Chancellor said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance, "I wanted to speak with you privately." "I'm listening." "My people, the Altarians, have been a major galactic power for over 3,000 years. We've seen species rise and fall, watched empires crumble, observed the endless cycle of war and peace." The Chancellor paused, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "In all that time, we've learned one universal truth. Power without purpose destroys everything it touches. When I see humanity's military capabilities, I fear for galactic stability. And when I see the galaxy's response to innocent people being slaughtered," Admiral Rodriguez replied, "I fear for its soul." Chancellor Vextar was quiet for several moments. "Perhaps," he said finally, "the galaxy needs a species that fights for its soul instead of its stability." Years later, historians would mark the Battle of Erelon as the beginning of a new galactic age. The old powers remained influential, but the balance had shifted. Species that had been voiceless for millennia found their courage. Alliances formed based on shared values rather than mutual fear. And at the center of it all was humanity, no longer the young species asking for acceptance. but the civilization that had answered when others needed help. When Wing Commander Silas published his memoir years later, he ended it with a simple observation that captured what the galaxy had learned. We called out for aid, expecting silence. Instead, we discovered that in the vastness of space, there was a species that understood a simple truth. When someone needs help, you help them. Not because it's profitable, not because it's safe, not because it's easy. You help them because it's right. And that, more than any weapon or technology, is what makes humanity the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They fight not just with ships and guns, but with the absolute conviction that some things are worth dying for. The Void Swarm learned this lesson too late. They encountered a species that would rather die fighting than live hiding. And in the end, that made all the difference. The galaxy had cried out for aid, and humanity had answered with its mightiest army. But that army's greatest weapon wasn't advanced technology or superior numbers. It was the simple human belief that when someone needs help, you help them, no matter the cost.